Australian Aviation Podcast, the official podcast of Australian aviation, unpacking the latest insights, developments and issues impacting Australia's aviation sector.
Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast, where we talk a little bit about aviation and there's a lot of nonsense as well. Talking of nonsense, he's grinning, my co-host Jake Nelson. Jake, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm okay, Adam. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Now, we usually start the show, any shout-outs, any messages we've had. What have we had in our inbox this week?
Well, we had a couple of comments.
Excellent.
There were some comments on one of our shorts from last week on the South Korean plane crash.
Tragic incident.
Yeah. Kamevla, says, great video, guys. It's always hard to make content like this without the full picture, but you've provided the info we have in an easy-to-understand way. Thank you.
That's what I try to do. Not dumb it down. That's not the phrase I'd use, but to just explain things in plain English so that everybody can get on board. Thank you very much for your comment. Very much appreciated. More good comments, I'm assuming, coming my way.
Meanwhile, VGroff2315.
VGroff?
VGROF 2315 says, sorry, but talk about a guy, Adam, who lacks a media voice. It's almost painful to listen to him.
VGroff says, I lack a media voice. Well, you're called VGroff. Now, you did actually show me this earlier. He's got a picture. Has he got a picture of his face with it? He's like a...
No, it's no. That was a different guy. No, VGroff has a picture of a boat.
A boat?
A boat, yeah.
Well, mate, you got the wrong show because we're doing aeroplanes, not doing boats. So, what a horrible thing to say. You just lack a media voice. Well, At least I've got a voice in the media, mate. Where's yours? You've got nothing.
Well, I think we can workshop some different voices for you, Adam.
Well, like AI ones?
Maybe AI ones, or maybe you can work on your impressions.
I don't do any impressions. I used to do Tony Blair, which would not work 20 years later for an Australian audience. I used to do William Hague as well, which very, very niche for an Australian audience. Did Jeremy Clarkson, but I mean, is that pretty out of date now. That's all I can really do. I usually leave the impressions to you. Yeah,
I could try Christopher Walken. He's got a very distinctive voice, easy to mimic.
Well, I've never tried it before. I'm not going to do it on the spot. It'll be terrible. Can you do it? I bet you can do it, can't you?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. I'm Christopher Walken, although I suppose it really should be Christopher Flyin'.
That is one of the most... We did a lot of nonsense on this show. That's up there. So what we could do, bearing in mind apparently, whatever his name is, V Gruffman, I don't have a media voice, is you could do the show... But you talk as Jake Nelson, and then you do the impression of somebody else. That could be like the host. So essentially, the whole show is you talking to yourself, which you'd love, and you can
running back and forth between the mics.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe you can have a number, because you do impressions of like hundreds of people, right? So you could just have multiple guests on the show, and it's just you locked in the studio talking to yourself for an hour, but with loads of different people.
See, so you like this idea because then you might not have to let me out.
Well, I wouldn't have to do any work, was what I was thinking. Firstly, and then we could just lock you in there, and then like just put some food outside and whatever, and you just spin yourself out.
But I have to say that's probably not the best video to making comments on about your media voice, given that it was about the tragic South Korean plane crash.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah, that's just we've no respect for you. If you do listen to whatever his name is, VGroff, what's his name again?
VGroff.
VGroff, we don't want you listening. I don't want you watching. Go away. Just go away. I don't want you. We've got hundreds, thousands of listeners. We can lose one or two, so just go away.
We probably shouldn't be saying that because then the management will come down on us.
Phil would be like, every single one counts. Whatever, I don't care. Like, if you're going to be horrible to me, go away. Just listen to another aviation podcast. Have our rivals got podcasts?
I don't know,
like
Adam.
Simple Flying. God, that's boring, isn't it? I bet, because that website's boring. I bet their podcast would be dull as well. God.
Have they considered branching out into complicated flying, maybe?
I don't know. We don't want to talk about them. They're just a...
Of course, we love all of our listeners and viewers here, and we welcome your feedback and your constructive criticism.
I don't like them all. You can be nice to them all. I don't like all of them. Some of them
we like all of our listeners who aren't mean to us.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We got any other shout-outs before we do some actual news? Is that it?
Well, just, as always, shout-outs to our dedicated aviation plane spotters. We had pictures coming in the new Jetstar planes and of, we had that NASA plane from the other week. Our plane spotters do good work, and we love them.
Particular shout out to Victor Poddy and Craig Murray as well, who've both been quite prolific recently. Thank you very much. Right, let's talk about the news. I do fear this is going to involve me talking about the news, which I don't like to do, but what are we talking about
And yet
first?
you're here.
And yet I'm here. I have no choice, contractually obliged. Go on.
Well, one of the biggest stories of the past week, of course, has been the California wildfires.
Yes.
Which have devastated Los Angeles. Lots of historic neighborhoods burnt down. Millions of people have lost their homes, or I'm not sure about millions, but a lot of people have lost their homes. People have been injured and killed. Horrible thing to have happened, of course, and it could have some knock-on effects for Australia, Adam, as you sort of mentioned in an article over the past week.
Yeah, exactly. So for those of you that aren't aware, effectively a lot of countries, including, say, Australia and the US, have a kind of system where they share aerial firefighting aircraft. And this happens because traditionally the kind of firefighter seasons didn't overlap. Obviously, the summer is when you're most likely to have bushfires or wildfires. So what would traditionally happen is the US would send some of its larger aerial firefighting aircraft to Australia in our summer months, and we would send our aircraft back the other way. Now, obviously, as you could imagine, the relationship is stacked in the US's favour. They have a lot of bigger aircraft. Now, what we've seen with these LA wildfires is that they are happening in the midwinter period. This is happening at a time of year when traditionally you don't get bushfires. Now, some people would say this is climate change, this is global warming. Some people would say it's due to the fire preparationness. But whatever you believe or not, we are seeing fire seasons, bushfire seasons, which are going longer and longer and longer. And what this means for Australia is there is a worry that, of course, the US and other countries will not be able to lend Australia its own aircraft because they will need them more. Now, this was something that Greg Mullins, who was the former New South Wales fire chief, told me on the Australian Aviation Podcast a number of years ago, just after the Black Summer. He said, we're seeing longer and longer in seasons, and there's going to come a point, Adam, where this is going to massively impact us. We are now getting to that point. We are actually seeing this happen. So he's kind of predicted the future somewhat. This also ties in with, after the Black Summer, we had a royal commission which looked at the kind of response to the Black Summer and what we can do. And its central recommendation is that we should have a larger kind of national fleet of aircraft that all of the states and territories can share. At the moment, the majority of the aerial firefighting aircraft we have are owned or controlled by the states and territories. Basically, they put the money in. The problem with that is, of course, much like the international problem, the states want to keep the aircraft for themselves. They don't necessarily want to share them around if the whole country's burning at the same time. So one of the recommendations is you need a national aerial firefighting fleet that contains more larger aircraft that you can use as and when. Now, this Royal Commission, or its kind of conclusions, were published under the last federal government, and they largely rejected this. They did actually increase some spending, but in terms of having this larger national fleet, they turned that down, and they said we're largely comfortable with the aircraft we have. Now, the kind of dilemma here is that most years we would not need that larger fleet. So, for instance, we've seen the last 3, 4, 5 summers now have been relatively quiet in terms of bushfires.
I wouldn't go back as far as 5. We did have the Black Summer.
That's what I mean. Yeah. So the Black Summer was 2019, 2020, right? So we're coming to 2025, right? So the last 3 or 4 summers have, relatively speaking, not been too bad because we've had, is it El Nino, La Nina? I always get them the wrong way around. We've had the rainy one, basically.
La Nina is the rainy one here.
La Nina, right. We've had La Nina. So we've been fortunate in that we haven't had particularly awful bushfire seasons. So in those years, spending money on having a fleet looks like a waste of money because you're like, we've paid all this money and these aircraft are just sitting there. Obviously, the argument for having a fleet is that you need it just in case. You never know when the bad season's going to come.
You'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Exactly. And so while it might be cheaper in the short term to just be trading aircraft with the US and other countries, your safest bet is to have your own. It is a very intriguing situation. Whatever your views on climate change, there is no doubt these fire seasons are getting longer and longer and longer. It seems to me absurd that we as a country are not investing in a national fleet. Yes, it costs a lot of money, but relatively speaking, this is not going to be tens of billions. It seems insane to me not to have that. So as a country, we need to think a lot more about what we're going to do with this.
Of course, that would require a politician to think more than 3 years ahead at any given time. Which,
well, yes, I do see this.
But I mean, it is sort of an unforeseen consequence or an odd consequence of climate change on aviation. In that, if these, as you say, if these fire seasons are getting longer and longer, over in California, LA should not be on fire in January.
Exactly.
But it's fanned by the Santa Ana winds, and things are getting a lot hot, and things are hotter and drier over there in winter than they should be. And there's people who are experts on these sorts of things. On California, it's like once a fire gets going with the Santa Ana winds behind it, you cannot contain that fire. But as you say, with these fire seasons getting longer and longer, the sort of an interesting quirk that it has for aviation is we can't be sharing these aircraft around.
Exactly. And it's completely understandable that countries or states would be selfish, because there'd be public outcry if you gave your aircraft away. The other issue that we seem to be having is when we do have bad bushfire seasons, they tend to be worse than ever. Now, for my view, there's two reasons for that. One reason is the fact that we are getting warmer summers, we are getting more dramatic seasons, but it's also the case in terms of how we've advanced in terms of fighting bushfires. Basically, we've got better at it than ever before. We are now able to detect fires quicker than we were 10, 20 years ago. We're able to put the majority of them out. The problem with this is that bushfires in of themselves are not a bad thing. This is nature, and if you took climate change out of the equation, we would have bushfires every so often, and that is a way that the forest kind of can cleanse itself, it can regrow itself. So they are not in of itself bad things. The problem is, of course, if we are putting them out all the time, then what we are doing is almost creating a tinderbox, so that when we do have a fire that we're not able to put out quickly, it goes up very, it really
This is why
off.
we have hazard reduction.
Exactly that. And so the dilemma that we're going to have moving forward is, as technology, particularly with space, gets better, we have to make the decision of, do we let a fire burn or do we put it out quickly? Who makes that decision? We can use things like AI and technology to get a better idea, because obviously, like you were hinting at before, you can look at how the winds are blowing, how bad it's going to be, what happens if somebody gets that call wrong. So it is a very, 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 very complicated issue. But certainly you're seeing these horrendous wildfires in LA, which are not, for want of a better phrase, in the middle of nowhere. They are in one of the most esteemed residential neighborhoods in the country. When we had the Black Summer, we had one of the, if not the worst bushfire event in many, many generations. So we are seeing these things getting worse and worse and worse, maybe less frequent, but when they are happening, they're really kicking off. It doesn't help as well that, particularly in Australia, we have a lot of people that live near the bush. We have a lot of people that live in harm's way, just like you had this in LA. So we're particularly affected. Obviously, what's happening in LA is a bit of a tragedy. Obviously, people have died and a lot of people have lost their homes. But in a perverse way, I think it's a good thing in that it's refocusing attention on whether we need that firefighting fleet. Greg Mullins, who I really, really like, I've interviewed him a number of times. He was the guy who 6 months before the Black Summer warned it was going to happen. And I don't mean that he was warning in general. He said, your next season is going to be horrendous. And he was able to do that because he saw how many dry summers we'd had. He saw the fact that effectively the bush was a tinderbox ready to go up. He saw worse and worse situations. He saw there wasn't enough investment in aircraft, and he said loudly, I think at one point, I might have got this a little bit wrong, he put an advert, I think it was in the Sydney Morning Herald or the LVH, saying we need to prepare for this, it is coming. Everyone poo-pooed him. He was totally right. He has been banging on and on and on about the fact we need to take seriously the recommendations of this Black Summer Royal Commission. And he's been talking about it for years, and he's been ignored. And he's been ignored again because this is becoming not less of an issue, but because we've had these kind of less bad bushfire seasons. But at least this does put the emphasis on it. We had a situation where and I don't want to get into politics, it felt like the coalition federal government largely poo-pooed most of these these recommendations. Labour have taken them a little bit more, but we still haven't seen the big investment. Hopefully this will sharpen minds, because from my eyes, investing in a bigger fleet, like you said there, it's better to have them and not need them than not have these aircraft there at all.
I mean, going back to an earlier point, talking about countries like not wanting to send resources to other countries when they need them at home. We have seen some international support for the LA bushfires. Mexico has sent a bunch of firefighters over to California. Ukraine as well, actually. Volodymyr Zelensky has volunteered some Ukrainian firefighters to head over there, possibly as part of a jab at Donald Trump Jr., who complained on Twitter about the LA Fire Department donating supplies to Ukraine. So there is international support, and that international support is probably going to continue to be vital. Bringing it back more to aviation, there has been a lot of with the water bombers going around. There's been a lot of online people watching the water bombers and tracking them on flight radar, and watch it. There's like a very impressive video of a water bomber just like dousing completely one of these fires that's been going around on social media. So it's bringing a lot of attention to how important aircraft are in fighting fires. One thing that's also been highlighted is that you should not fly drones near wildfires. There's been at least one firefighting aircraft that has been grounded. CL415 Super Scooper, this water bombing plane, has been grounded last week because some idiot was flying an unauthorized drone that crashed into the plane's wing.
That's ridiculous. Yeah, don't do that.
If you fly drones over an active fire zone and there's like aviation going on, if there's aircraft up there trying to put out the fires, that those aircraft will have to be grounded or taken away because they don't want the people flying the planes to collide with your drone. Use some common sense, people. Do not fly your drones over active wildfires.
Well, I think I completely agree. Okay, welcome back. So ending on that dramatic note there, do not fly drones over an active fire zone. Jake, what are we going to talk about next?
Well, we had a story, the latest update on the Virgin Qatar story, where you reported. Oh,
not me
Adam,
again! I don't want to do this. No, go on. Yeah.
And yet you're here.
And yet I'm here. Go on.
So apparently, according to reports in the Fin review that you've cited here, Virgin is kind of holding off on appointing the replacement to Jane Hrdlicka because it wants the federal government to approve this Qatar deal first.
Yeah, so this is entirely speculation. None of this has been confirmed by anybody, but I would say the journalist in the AFR who reported this is, next to myself and you, Jake, the best journalist on the patch, one of the best journalists in the country, impeccably well sourced. And she was the journalist who was talking about the demise of Bonza back when Bonza didn't even know about the demise of Bonza. Absolutely outstanding. So what she says does carry a little bit of weight. Basically, her latest report, which she says has been sourced by two different people, close to negotiations, says that Virgin Australia is effectively holding off on announcing their new CEO until the deal with Qatar has been rubber stamped by the federal government, or is it the Foreign Investment Review Board,
which is part of the federal government.
Which is part of the government and basically advises up to the Treasurer. So she basically says that they are waiting for this to happen in order to make the appointment, and that is because the rumoured appointee, who I can't remember off the top of my head, but you have
Paul Jones,
thank you very much. The rumoured appointee was, and this is again, it's how you look into this, was formerly a Qantas executive who was apparently, I say he was apparently involved, was involved with the illegal outsourcing of staff. Obviously, how involved he was, how much that was his fault, is very much open to interpretation. But as far as the Transport Workers Union was concerned, he was a key figure in that. The TWU obviously took Qantas to court over that. This is something that is cuts very deeply with them. So they don't want this guy to be appointed. So the story goes, Virgin are waiting for the deal with Qatar to be rubber stamped before they announce their new CEO. And that is at the moment because the TWU are backing the Qatar deal, but they may not back it if this guy is CEO. So there appears to be a kind of complex web of things that are meant to be happening. Again, it's important to say this is only speculation. We do know, I think we spoke about last week or the week before, Jane Hrdlicka, the Virgin CEO, announced her resignation February last year, and we assumed then it would be a matter of weeks or a few months before she went. She has carried on for another 12 months. In that 12 months, she's done an absolutely astonishing job from the outside, at least. She has raised their profit to, I think, was it $500 million a year, which is extraordinary considering they were losing billions every year for 10 years. And she's obviously been a key figure in making this deal with Qatar happen, which has a potential, one, to allow them to go into proper long-haul routes through wet lease and Qatar aircraft. It also means they have the might of one of the biggest, wealthiest airlines in the world behind them. And what that means really is suddenly Qantas has an opposition with teeth. It has competitors that can really strike. So she has clearly been a key figure in making this happen. I wouldn't rule out the possibility that she stays on in this role for longer, but certainly the speculation seems to be that there is this kind of messy relationship between the Qatar deal getting signed off and potentially a new CEO being appointed. We also have to throw into the mix that we're going to have a federal election at some point in the next 4 or 5 months. You'll know more you'll know more about this than me, Jake. But was it mid-May or something? It's got to happen.
Yeah, I think it's got to be by sometime in May.
So you would presume the government would have to make a decision before that point. Maybe it goes after. Of course, if a Liberal government comes in before that point, then almost certainly the Libs will, or the coalition will, allow this to go through because they were in favour of Qatar having more flights immediately. So there's this whole tangled, messy web.
And of course, throwing into that as well, the TWU, who as we say is opposed to this deal. Not opposed to the deal, opposed to Paul Jones potentially being appointed because of...
They basically have a blood feud with him. Yeah. Effectively, they have a blood feud with him. And again, this is all politics. Of course, like in a lot of countries, just like in the UK, the unions have a close relationship with Labour. They always have done. I think, is it Tony Sheldon, who was a former TWU, head of a TWU, now a senator for Labour. So there's an awful lot of crossover there. Effectively, the outsourcing deal that Qantas did was probably the thing that's made the TWU the most angry in the last 10 years. So this cuts very, very, very deep with them. Saying that, though, in Virgin's defence, if Paul Jones is to be appointed, the TWU and the union similarly despise Jane Holitka with every pore in their body due to her time at Jetstar. I think when I wrote the story up 4 or 5 years ago, I put the headline as union nemesis Jane Holitka, new Virgin CEO. She was despised and she turned it round, and she turned it round very, very quickly. She sat down with them all and said, look, this is a fresh start for us both. She's now, I would say, really improved relations with the TWU. So you could argue from the outside in, they've done this before, and you've got to give the new CEO a chance. If it is this Paul Jones and he is appointed, it seems to me, again, from the outside, a little bit unfair to make out like this whole outsourcing thing was his decision. Clearly, ultimately, it was the big dog, Alan Joyce, that was, making the major things. So we haven't heard this guy's versions of event and this guy's side of the story as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the FIRB finally does make that decision.
Yes.
Of course, the tickets to Doha are already on sale. They were given preliminary approval late last year by the ACCC, and there's sort of an undertaking that if this deal is not allowed to go through, if they can't do these wet lease flights to Doha, then customers will be refunded or rebooked on alternative flights.
Yeah, because it's already been rubber stamped by the ACCC. It's still got to go through its final stage. God, I'm under a lot of pressure having to talk. It's actually quite hard, isn't it? I forgot about how hard it is. You actually do a really good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right, can we talk about something else that doesn't involve me having a talk? Or have you loaded the whole thing up so I'm going to have to do some work this week?
No, because earlier... earlier we were talking about people putting silly things into flight paths of aircraft. Yes. What's the latest silly thing that's been put into the flight path of an aircraft, Adam?
Right, this is an extraordinary story that emerged in the Australian, I think, a few hours ago as we record this on Tuesday afternoon. And basically the story in the Australian was that flights from Sydney to Johannesburg in South Africa are being substantially delayed because of the re-entry of SpaceX rockets. And this isn't something that Qantas kind of hid. They've been very open about it, and they gave a statement that went into quite a lot of detail about what's going on, which I can understand from Qantas' point of view because it's not their fault. Now, just to put my space hat on, or my space helmet on, for a second to talk about how this works. So SpaceX's most popular rocket is what's called the Falcon 9, and this is a kind of their common or garden rocket that they use to put payloads, to put satellites into. I don't know why I'm pointing out there. That they used to put it into
for the benefit of our listeners, Adam is pointing at the TV screen.
I'm pointing at the TV screen, which is red and not in any way a starry background.
It's sort of slightly higher than you, but up there would generally, towards the ceiling. Yeah.
But basically, this is what's called a two-stage rocket, which basically means there's two, and I'm bodging the science here. There's two like rocket-like things that fire out, gas and go up in the sky. The first stage is fully reusable, and that is the biggest, most expensive stage. This is what costs 60% of the money.
So you'd hope it'd be reusable, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, yes, but until SpaceX started doing this, it wasn't reusable. What used to happen is that the rocket would go up and the whole thing would end up falling into the sea or burning up in the atmosphere. What the SpaceX Falcon 9 does is that the first stage goes up, it detaches from the rest of the rocket, and then it comes down and lands either on the ground or on a drone ship, and it's got little legs that come down, and it uses a combination. Well, it uses AI and automation to make a perfect landing, given the various winds and friction it's on them. The second stage, which is the higher bit of the rocket, that is a bit of the rocket that powers effectively that could basically flies up the thing that contains the payloads that then go off into space. So this is a thing that basically carries a spacecraft that will put your satellites into orbit. This second stage, though, is unable to be reusable. They think it would cost too much money. It will be too tricky to work out. So what happens is after it's dropped the payloads off into its exact location in space, it basically falls back down into the atmosphere and burns up. And effectively the kind of, and again, I'm bodging the science, the shards of rocket kind of effectively fizzle out and drop on the ground. SpaceX rather smartly do this over the southern Indian Ocean because it's an enormous, relatively sparsely used bit of ocean, which does make sense. However, it does appear that this is actually causing problems with Qantas flights from Sydney to Johannesburg. Now, this is particularly difficult for Qantas because they have recently swapped out their 787-9s for their larger A380s. I don't know if that means it's a bigger target. I don't know. but obviously, probably chances are it would be fine. But clearly, if there are bits of rockets spraying across the ocean, you have to avoid that. Now, one of the things that makes this quite tricky for Qantas is that in terms of a rocket taking off, it's even more unreliable than an aircraft taking off, because what will happen is they will get like a launch window, which could be a number of hours, it could be a number of days, and it will kind of aim to launch within that window of time. But of course, bad weather can affect launches. Engineering problems can affect launches. So it's actually very, very common for a launch to be scrubbed, as they called it, which is basically cancelled. It's very, very common for it to be delayed. So if you're planning your flights, it's almost impossible to plan your flights around what SpaceX are doing. Now, it seems to me like this is going to be a very difficult problem for anybody to fix. Clearly, it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous that Qantas flights are being delayed because of stuff that SpaceX is doing. It feels like this is almost a little bit of a loophole within the law, in that at the moment you have to give a lot of notice before you launch a rocket, but it's not the actual launch that Qantas are avoiding. They are avoiding the re-entry. This is why it's quite unique. Obviously, Qantas aren't flying aircraft directly over. There's not a rocket that's going up and just knocking Qantas aircraft out of the sky. To be very clear, it's not a missile. But it's this kind of unique thing that nobody's really considered what happens when when the re-entry happens over the atmosphere and what happens with Qantas flights. Now, particularly this is difficult for Qantas because actually, I might be wrong. I think I'm correct in saying that Qantas flights from Sydney to Johannesburg, in terms of occupancy, are their most successful international flights. So the last set of BITRA data from the Department of Transport shows that outbound flights from Sydney to Johannesburg, I think, are looking at like 98% seat occupancy. We were talking the other week about flights to Abu Dhabi and to Doha and how high they are. Flights to Johannesburg are even more successful, which is why they've swapped in the A380. So yes, this does present a little bit of a problem. Qantas being a big beast in Australia, I don't know how it works in terms of how they can lobby SpaceX to stop doing things or to have a better system. I don't know. You're a huge fan of Elon Musk. I'd imagine you're taking his
we're
side
all
of things.
really hot on Elon Musk until he starts interfering with Qantas flight paths, aren't we?
Well, it's a bit windmill.
Suddenly Elon Musk has met his match, has he not, Adam?
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, it's two worlds collide together. One of the things I found so amusing is how open Qantas have been about this. They're not trying to hide it. It's obviously not their fault. It's obviously very bad for the passengers.
Of course, some people might view this as something of an Alien versus Predator situation, might they?
And which one's Predator and which one's Alien? Is Qantas Predator?
That's a good question.
And do you think the Qantas kangaroo is like the Predator? Because they are, to be fair, quite violent.
So some people might argue that Elon Musk is the alien because he's obsessed with space.
Yes.
And Qantas is the Predator because of all these accusations of boxing out competitors.
Yes.
On the other hand, Qantas might be the alien because kangaroos can't fly, so obviously one that flies has to be from space.
Yeah.
And it's got a funky alien kind of name.
I would like a movie. Have you seen the new Alien movie? Alien?
I have not.
It's all right. But basically, they try and recreate the first one. So they're stuck on a spaceship. You know, it all goes a bit wrong. The aliens come out. How about
Classic story,
exactly. And I'm not a storyteller.
Girl meets alien.
Yeah. How about we pitch a movie, right? And so it's like maybe a spacecraft or just like an abandoned warehouse. And we've got Alan Joyce and Elon Musk, and they're just like wandering around. And at some point they meet. But there's all the scary stuff that happens.
Well, you could put it on pay-per-view. But you could argue that the Qantas is the alien because kangaroos can't fly and it's got a funky alien-sounding name. And Elon Musk is the Predator because of everything about him and who he is.
Well, on that note, actually, a lot of people are leaving Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it.
X, the everything app, yes.
X, the everything app, yes. And they are moving to Blue Sky. If I read it correctly, we've hit a milestone in Blue Sky.
Yeah, we've hit more than 500 followers now
really
on Blue
good.
Sky.
Yeah.
So if you are on Blue Sky, it's the perfect place to follow Australian aviation because it's so appropriate. At australianaviation.com.au on Blue Sky.
But we obviously are very apolitical here. We don't take sides left or right or in the centre. And I did ask you this time last week I want to know an update how things are going with setting up our Truth Social account. Because there's a lot of people out there and they all like aviation too.
Yeah, we don't want them.
We don't want them. Well, it just seems a bit wrong, like a bit apolitical. Because if Media Watch are watching this, is it Media Watch, right? And he'll be looking at this and he'll be going, "Oh well, they're joining Blue Sky, but not Truth Social. Maybe they're a biased media outlet." What would you say to that?
We are biased in favour of aviation.
Right. Okay. Oh, you've wheedled out of that. We wheedled out of that.
Should we go for one more break, Adam?
All right. See, this issue. This episode's disaster. I'm having to do all the work. You're taking over. Yeah, you say it then. Go on, say it.
Okay, welcome back. This is the Australian
You
Aviation
did all right on that.
Podcast.
It's not as easy as it looks, so is it? You started a little bit.
That's fine. I'll grow into the role.
Yeah.
We've had some interesting developments out of the Sunshine Coast, which, 6 or 7 months ago, things were looking a bit shaky in the Sunshine Coast because, of course, of the collapse of Bonza. That was, Bonza was one of the airlines that was a major contributor to the expansion of Sunshine Coast Airport. It was using Sunshine Coast as its first base of operations. It had, I think, more routes in the Sunshine Coast than from any other airport, and then the rug got pulled out from them and Bonza collapsed. And so Sunshine Coast Airport was in a bit of limbo. But Jetstar has really actually been pushing to expand its presence at Sunshine Coast Airport. The latest thing is that they're putting a couple 100,000 new seats on between Sunshine Coast and Melbourne. So they're going to be between March and June this year. They're going to be putting in not a couple 100,000 seats, 34,000 seats, which is a lot less than that. But 34,000 seats between Melbourne and the Sunshine Coast from March and June to June this year. They're going to be putting more than 140 new evening flights. They're going to be upgauging some A320 services to A321s. That includes the CEO and the Neo.
The upgauging, by the mean, when you put a bigger aircraft
Putting a bigger
on.
aircraft, yep. So they're putting bigger aircraft on Melbourne to Sunshine Coast. That includes the older A321s and the new A321 Neo LRs. They've got 19 of those now, by the way. The VHOYW arrived in Australia last month, began revenue flights last Friday. So in total, Jetstar is going to be offering more than 350,000 seats between Melbourne and the Sunshine Coast this year. And this follows Jetstar starting announcing Trans-Tasman flights from the Sunshine Coast to Auckland. And, of course, last year, very notably jumping on this route that Bonza had vacated between the Sunshine Coast and Cairns. And so it seems like Jetstar is kind of stepping in and giving Sunshine Coast Airport a bit of a shot in the arm following the exit of Bonza.
Yeah, exactly. And again, a lot of people said that a lot of Bonza's routes wouldn't work. And just to do the kind of usual explanation, Bonza was unique in that it flew point-to-point services. And what this effectively means is it mostly flew from a smaller holiday destination to another smaller holiday destination, effectively cutting out the capital city layover. Now, the critics, of which there were many, kind of poo-pooed this and said it would never work. The population is too small and too dispersed. But Bonza's argument, and Tim Jordan, the CEO's argument, was that actually, unless you put on a route, unless you launch the service, you then can stimulate demand. And if people know it exists, then they might go for it. And one of the arguments is that actually, even though Bonza went under, a lot of their routes were doing a lot better than people thought. Some of them would have succeeded if they had a smaller aircraft, but equally, there were probably a handful of routes that were doing very well with a larger aircraft. So the fact you're seeing Jetstar going in, taking over they've taken over one. I think they're rumoured to start another two.
There's rumours that they're in talks to go to Toowoomba to Melbourne. I believe, Adam, actually, you had a story about Launceston Airport looking to get some of those old Bonza routes going again, talking to airlines about that.
Did I? I need to have a laptop. The quotes I got, they were from the CEO of Launceston Airport, right? Yeah, right. So basically, and what he was saying is that actually a lot of these Bonza routes were success stories, and he made the point that
the chief executive Shane O'Hare, he said that they were real goers. Actually,
yeah, exactly, they were real goers, and he also made a very good point that effectively the people that decide on an airline's network are, I think he called them like very conservative. They will always play it safe, which makes sense because you lose a lot of money if you take a kind of a mad gamble. But now they've seen the evidence, they can see it's worked. So again, ironically, this is more evidence that perhaps Bonza's done a lot of good. We are seeing now some of these old Bonza, or one of them, and more to follow, of those Bonza routes being taken. But you would like to think that perhaps in a year or so, maybe more unusual routes could be launched. Bonza have shown that you can stimulate demand, you can make it work. Also, it's important to say that Bonza, and we also talk about rightly, the Bonza senior team, all the Bonza staff, all the Bonza customers, obviously have had it really tough with this, but particularly those smaller airports that Bonza was servicing, they are going to see a lot of them a dramatic fall in their passenger numbers. A lot of them invested, put time, money, hired people in order to facilitate Bonza. So the more of these old routes we can get going again, the better.
Yeah, Bonza walked on these routes so that other airlines could run, which was probably the problem because they should have flown instead of walking. That's a
terrible joke. That's rubbish. Go on, move on. That's beneath your jokes. Go on.
Speaking of airports and their capacity, we've got kind of a tale of two airports this week. We've got Hobart shattering a December record. So this record was They had the biggest December ever, I think, breaking even pre-COVID levels. 277,000 passengers last month. 2019 they had 271,000, so they've broken past that pre-COVID level. January figures also apparently looking positive for the airport. They've exceeded 180,000 passengers from the December 20th to January 6th peak, which is well above last year's figures of 165,454, and also above the record in 2019 to 2020. And this is, of course, as Hobart is in the middle of these $130 million runway upgrades and this $200 million terminal overhaul. So Hobart is coming out quite well for itself. And, they'll be looking to attract more international flights once that terminal upgrade is complete. Another airport that's doing quite well, especially internationally, is Melbourne. Melbourne has seen its busiest month for international traffic on record.
That's incredible. So that includes pre-COVID. That is forever.
Yes,
and ever sort of thing.
It's international capacity at 113% of pre-COVID levels.
So that's so 13% up basically.
Yeah, that's 13 percentage points above.
That's an incredible jump. That's not like they've just climbing above by 1 or 2%. That is a very significant jump.
Yeah, exactly. They had almost 2.1 million domestic passengers, which is still growing slightly. But this capacity, around 72% of it internationally, is used by foreign carriers. And they've actually come out in this new announcement and said, we're having a lot of trouble with this capacity. It's putting a lot of strain on our resources and our existing infrastructure. So we're looking to expand our international terminal again. They're already overhauling their international baggage systems to the tune of $500 million, but they want to add an expanded international satellite, up to 5 new wide-body gates, more room for shops, more room for airline lounges, more passenger waiting areas to sort of take the squeeze off the existing facilities. Laurie Argus, the CEO, has basically said it's sort of full to bursting. They're already experiencing regular congestion in international arrivals area during peak periods. She says as Melbourne's population grows, it's important that our infrastructure grows too. So we love a good airport infrastructure story, particularly when it's connected so tightly to more and more evidence of this pre-COVID recovery, which we were going back. It's a constant theme that we've touched on. We were always expecting domestic to do better than international in terms of the recovery.
Yeah, exactly, because we sort of mid-COVID and we didn't really know how this was going to pan out. It was almost as if we thought we're all going to be scared to fly internationally. We'll all be wearing masks forever. And that's kind of how we saw a world that would be smaller. In reality, that's not happened at all. There was, as Alan Joyce said, a pent-up demand. People were desperate to go on holiday. And also, once something's been taken away, once you give it to some people back, obviously they're very, very keen to travel. We're getting back to a world where international airfares are starting to go down, not necessarily at 2019 levels, but they are a lot lower than they were a couple of years ago. So it is becoming affordable again. A lot of that is because more airlines are coming online, which means competition, which means prices go down. Domestic is still what's struggling a little bit, because effectively business travel is not what it was in 2019. And that's because a lot of business meetings now will be done over Zoom. I think human-to-human contact is still very, very important, but maybe you only get on that business flight to sign the deal at the end rather than going back and forth a lot of time to have every single meeting. One of the big differences is that in 2018, 2019, I did very few video calls, maybe one video call every couple of months. Now that is the standard way we meet. That is a big difference. So that is what we think is kind of knocking that down. The international is kind of taking a bit of the burden. Domestic is still down. I think I did a story a couple of weeks ago which basically said that Sydney and Melbourne flights were something like 7 or 8% down on what they were in 2019. Obviously, COVID is now very much over. All the restrictions have been lifted. So we're probably going to struggle to get back to 100%, at least for a few years. So that is the kind of bizarre way we've seen this recovery play out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it continues, of course. And we've seen airports around the country kind of break their international pre-COVID records before their domestic records. I think one exception has kind of been Perth, where that growth has really been driven by regional and FIFO. But international passenger traffic, the gross number is obviously still below the domestic number. There will always be more domestic passengers than international, but the recovery when compared to pre-COVID is a lot bigger. So you're getting more domestic passengers in total, but compared to pre-COVID levels, the increase is greater for international.
Right, we got anything else to talk about? We're going to wrap it up.
We should probably talk about one notable thing in international aviation over the past week. There was an ad campaign. And this is not really Australian aviation, but I feel like we have to talk about it because perhaps an ill-judged social media ad campaign by Pakistan International Airlines. Basically, this picture. We're coming back to France, and it had a Pakistan International Airlines plane flying directly at the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is bad. Once you point out, it is bad. But at the same time, it's in the eye of the beholder. I feel a bit sorry for that designer. He or she has now been fired. It does look bad once you point it out. Particularly, we are coming. It's quite aggressive. No, and it is actually pointing right at the Eiffel Tower as well.
What does the actual text of the ad say? It says, "Paris, we're coming today," and this plane is like pointing directly at the Eiffel Tower. Now, in the defense of this ad, you have to say everyone now knows that Pakistan International Airlines is flying to Paris again.
They do. They do. That is true. If you buy into the idea that there's no such thing as bad publicity, then they've done a very, very good job.
But yeah, it's sort of an awkward ad. I think any airline would probably think twice about having one of their planes pointing directly at a monument after certain events.
Yeah, it's not. Doesn't look good. It's one of the golden rules of aviation. Don't talk about flying into buildings, structures. Don't talk about bombs on aircraft. They're just like the golden rules, which actually you don't need to be taught. I'd like to think they're common sense. Just don't do it. Right. Okay. That is all we've got time for this episode. Jake, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. We're going off so Adam can work on his media voice.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully we need to use it again because hopefully just next episode we just go back to you doing all the work. I didn't like that. It's very uncomfortable. And I'm going to be losing my voice as well, which whatever his name was, G. Vogsy. What was his name?
It was V. Groff.
But if V. Groff, and it will be a him, if he is, can you imagine the amount of abuse I'm going to get? Well, this is the thing. If you do want to send me more abuse, it means you've listened to yet another episode, so you clearly love it. So there you go. Anyway, we'll be back on the show the same time next week. But for now, from me and Jake, goodbye.
Goodbye.